Welcome. My name is Forrest Longman. I'm the president of City Club. The mission of City Club is to inform, connect, and engage our community to strengthen the civic health of our region. We emphasize civil conversation and listening to others. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people, and it has been that way since time immemorial. As always, I'd like to thank all our volunteers who make our programs possible. I'd also like to thank KMRE radio board member Robert Clark, who's producing today's program, and BTV10, who will be broadcasting it to their viewers. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for their support. They are Bruce and Claudia Diezend, the Opportunity Council, Baron Smith Doggart, attorneys at law, Colshan CPAs, Danny Neal of the Molyat Group, Unity Care Northwest, Pacific Continental Realty, Western Washington University, Village Books, Whatcom Community College, and the Firehouse Arts and Events Center. Our next program in August will be the first of two political forums. It'll feature the top two finishers of the August 2nd primary for the 42nd District Senate seat, as well as the candidates for the Whatcom County Public Utilities District. Finally, I'd like to turn things over to Jane Bright, who will moderate today's program.
Thank you, Forrest. And I would also like to welcome everyone and do a special thank you to City Club Program Committee member Heather Erb, who brought this program and issue to the City Club and it really got this to happen today. And unfortunately, this is her last program. She is leaving the City Club, and we all thank her for her hard work and frankly, being a real pleasure to work with. Before we start on the program today, let me just tell you a little bit about our goal, and that is to start an understanding of the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. And we'll spend the first hour looking at, trying to understand the issue in terms of what it is and the scope, looking at where efforts are today to try and start addressing it, both in legislatively and in the Attorney General's office. And then we'll look at next steps and the future. And then shortly after 1 o'clock, the questions that you folks have will be presented by Dan Ross, another member of the City Club. And so your questions will get addressed later. And we are really so pleased and so honored to have our panelists today. And a special thank you to Representative Debra Lekanoff, who went through a lot of travel changes and gyrations to be able to be with us today. She has represented the 40th Legislative District since 2019, and that district includes parts of Whatcom, Skagit, and San Juan counties, and she is the only Native American woman in the legislature. She is the vice chair of the House State Government and Tribal Relations Committee and sits on the Appropriations Committee, as well as the Rural Development, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Committee. She has lived in Skagit Valley for about 20 years and served as the Governmental Affairs Director for the Swinomish tribe, dealing with issues at the international, federal, tribal, state, and local levels. Annie Forsman-Adams started her career in the movement to end violence against Indigenous people in 2011 and has continued to advocate for systemic change to address the social inequalities across Indian country. She now works for the Washington State Attorney General's Office as the policy analyst for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Task Force. Annie is completing her graduate program at Seattle University, where she studies the intersection of homicide, gender, race, and media. She lives on the Port Madison Reservation. So let's start with understanding the problem. And we'd like Representative Lekanoff to give us some background on the peoples we're talking about and the issue.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Jane. Thank you for inviting me. It's been such an honor coming into my third term serving the 40th Legislative District. My community resides from the Salish Sea, the beautiful San Juan Islands, Bellingham, throughout Anacortes and into the Skagit. I am really pleased to say that in my tenure of living in the Skagit and collaborating with all of the tribal, state, federal, First Nations governing bodies. I'm always reminded and thankful to the Swinomish tribe who really built who I am today as a Native American leader, the only Native American in the state legislature, but to all my 29 federally recognized tribes. Walking the homelands of the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe has been an honor for me and my daughter, Emma. Going back to my teachings, let me do a little bit of protocol here. My Tlingit name is Sikchasi. I come from Southeast Alaska in a small community. My culture, my life ways, my foods, the shape of my eyes, the color of my skin, the darkness of my hair is all related to the Coast Salish peoples. I'm connected to the people who've called their homelands home since time immemorial. I am part Tlingit, which is come from the Salmon people. So like Lummi Nation, Nooksack, Swinomish, our tribes on the west side, when the tide is out, the table is set. The best foods in the world come from the Salish Sea and from my homelands in my area. My dad is part Aleut from the Pribilof Islands. So I'm part Seal. And many of you have heard me tease a little bit about if you could bring people of the seal together and people of the salmon together, you have someone as unique as myself. I'm really, in my time and in my tenure of serving Washington tribes for the past 20 years, I've engaged in tribal governmental affairs that stretch from Washington state throughout the Northwest region, all the way across all of the Native American homelands to Washington, D.C. I've engaged with First Nations from British Columbia all the way across Northern Canada. And for the last 20 years, the political crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people has ripped through our communities. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I tell you this just to start off with our women who are missing, the first noted written, it's an emotional story. The first notice that was given to the federal government, the US military, came from Yakima Nation 167 years ago. A few weeks ago, I sat with Congressman Newland, Department of Interior Secretary Brian Newland, and his assistant, Tracy Goodluck. And a Yakima member stood up and reminded us that the first complaint given to the United States government of a missing Indigenous woman, Native American woman, came from Yakima Nation. That is just uncalled for. We have heard this story over and over again from Native American families across this nation, across Canada, that our women are being torn from our families. Our grandmothers, our aunties, our daughters are being ripped from our families, and they're either stolen or they're murdered. This is a crisis that has been quiet across the United States for hundreds of years. And with the work of our Department of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, with the work of Native American tribal leaders across the nation and across Canada, and with the work of my own state legislators, I give my respect to Senator Makadingra, who collaborated with me to create a missing and murdered Indigenous women's and people's task force. In the last 3 years, we have engaged with the state, our tribal communities, and our federal congressional members to be able to raise this as an issue, and where we can work together to remove some of the barriers so we can be able to protect the women. And some of the work that we've done with Attorney General Bob Ferguson this year is doing exactly that, Jane. We're removing the hand from the mouth of the woman so we can hear their unheard cries, their unheard screams, so we can provide and protect the women of today and the women yet to come. The impact of Native American people, Indigenous people, also going missing and also being murdered is stretching across this great state and across this great nation. And what is detrimental, and all of you can understand this, is, we are the first people of America. We are the first people should be protected, but yet Native Americans have the highest race of women and of people that have gone missing and gone murdered of all races, especially in Washington state. How could we walk on our own homelands? That's been our homeland since time immemorial. And why are we not protected? Why are we not safe? And why are we still facing this detrimental crisis even today? I'm joined by Annie Forsman today, who works with the Attorney General's office. And between Annie and I, we want to be able to share a little bit more information of what this crisis is, where Washington State is finding solutions, how we can better collaborate, and how we intertwine the work that we're doing here at the state with Secretary Interior Deb Haaland's missing and murdered unit, crisis unit. And then how do we work with our First Nations to the north? Because missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples doesn't recognize a border. And these women who are screaming don't recognize whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Senate member, whether you're a House of Representative, and they don't care which jurisdiction finds you. It's just, please find us. And that's the goal of what I hope to address and continue to work on. I have worked on for the past 20 years, but we'll continue to work on in the future. So I hope that lays a little bit of groundwork of today's conversation.
Yes.
Sorry, Jane, I'm a little long-winded, but it's an important topic, my friend.
It's you know, as we were preparing for this, it was very clear this topic could be discussed and should be discussed for days. So the challenge is going to be to try and keep it at a level where we get the, you know, the important points across. But let's switch to Annie. Annie, thank you so much for being with us. Could you tell us a little bit more about what the Attorney General's office is doing, what the task force is doing, and kind of what you hope to accomplish, what the task force hopes to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm happy to be with my sister and mentor as well. And just excited to share this information with everyone, because I think, well, we have a long journey ahead of us. I think that we've made some incredible strides in the last year, which really points to the commitment that this task force and the members on it have to addressing this issue. And I guess I'll give a little bit of background about the task force. I think that's a good place to start. The task force started as an idea several years ago, as we needed a really coordinated response to the MMIWP crisis in Washington State and throughout the Pacific Northwest region. So the Urban Indian Health Institute, based out of Seattle, released a report in 2018 that basically provided us a baseline of data for seeing Indigenous people in Washington and throughout the country. And some of the data was really, really shocking and alarming to us here at home in Washington. We found that Washington State in general had very high numbers of missing Indigenous women, and that Seattle particularly had high numbers compared to the other 71 cities that were addressed in that report. So that really got the attention of the public, of our legislators, of the Attorney General's office, and we started to form the idea of having a coordinated response. And out of that idea, the Representative Lekanoff and Senator Dingra worked to develop the task force. And so now we have this group of coordinated people that represent organizations from state organizations, urban Indigenous communities, and tribes from across the state in order to provide a really coordinated response to what the task force is doing. And I say this in every venue that I speak at, is that it's no small task. We have a big project ahead of us. Our legislative directives are very wide-reaching. And really what we're setting out to do is to get our arms around the problem. What do we know? What don't we know? Where are the gaps in data? Where are the gaps in services? And how do we start to address those gaps in a meaningful way? And the task force is really concentrated on doing two things. They're concentrated on understanding what's happening, but we're really concentrated on putting forth implementable, sustainable solutions that outlive the task force, should the task force ever come to not be, that these are ingrained in communities, in systems, in institutions that protect Indigenous people and prevent Indigenous people from going missing. And so that's really what we hope to accomplish, is we hope to accomplish this very strong systemic change where we create better futures for the next generations. And like I said, right now, what we're really working on is getting our arms around the problem, working with our data and research committee to understand the data side of things, and working with our, we have several subcommittees that address issues like criminal justice reform, community services and access to services. And then we center it all in the experiences of MMIWP families who often are the left to do this work on their own. So previous to the task force and this coordinated response, we saw that families were doing this work on the ground on their own, with their own resources and their limited capacity, because this was not their full-time job. This was not their they were not law enforcement officers. They were simply people looking for their missing loved ones when no one else would. And we want to really uphold that and make sure that community knows that we are here now to provide support when support is needed, and to change that so that families aren't robbed of their ability to grieve when a missing person, and when somebody goes missing or is murdered, and they're able to attend to their needs, their spiritual needs, their physical needs, and their familial needs in ways that.
One of the really shocking statistics I saw, and I'd like to ask both of you about this, is that Indigenous women tend to have murder and missing rates that are like 10 times higher than other minorities. And I'd like to explore this a bit in terms of what we know about this and some of the causes to this. And I'll turn to Representative Lekanoff on that first.
Thank you, Jane. And I'll Annie and I can partner up, and we have a discussion. We can complement each other to help share that information. You're right. We go back to why. And I go back to, Native Americans. You have to remember there are 577 federally recognized tribes across this great state. We are all sovereign nations. And with that comes a responsibility to be able to collaborate between tribal, local, federal, and state governing bodies. And let's pause and hold on to that conversation, because not many US citizens understand that there are even 577 recognized tribes, that they are tribal governments, that they are created and developed just like a state government and just like a federal government. So understand your jurisdiction, put that in the bike rack, and think about that as Annie and I start weaving through this conversation. Native American women are at a higher rate, 4 times more likely to go missing and murdered than white women. Native American women are at the highest of all races to go missing and murdered. Now remember, go back to pre-treaty days, go back 200 years from now. It was the Native Americans, and it was the white settlers coming across this nation, and we were battling with another. The Spaniards were coming across this nation, battling with one another. And who got caught in it? The Native Americans were murdered. Thousands and thousands and millions of Native Americans were ripped from their homelands, ripped from the places they called home, murdered, scalped, taken as a slavery, everything destroyed that we know. So now this is how Native Americans are viewed and treated. The other thing that I want to also remember in the history and think about that, Native Americans are also murdered at a rate as high as 10 times the national average, according to the Justice Department, going back to the reports that Annie was sharing. So not only were we ripped from our homes, now we are murdered 10 times at a higher rate than any other race. Think about this. when information on, so I'm sorry, let me go back to this. The National Crime Information Center includes 1,500 American Indian and Alaska Natives missing persons. But according to the Urban Indian Health Institute, most go unreported. I made a comment earlier that said, we don't know how many women actually have gone missing, and we don't actually know how many Native American people have gone missing. Following up on that a little bit, when information on missing persons is collected, law enforcement often omits or misclassifies racial data, making it difficult to assess the true extent of violence according to our advocates. We're learning this from our families with boots on the ground. We're learning this from the Urban Indian Health Institute and the research that Abigail Lekanoff has been doing as their executive director. You know, violence against Indigenous people is a crisis that's been underfunded for decades, not only underfunded by our tribal communities, but underfunded by our federal governments and just unrecognized by our local law enforcement and our state law enforcement. You know, far too often murdered and missing cases in Indian country go unresolved or unaddressed, leaving, and Annie and I have, you know, I really, my heart goes out to Annie. She's listened and engaged with so many family members in the work that she's done. And they're the ones that are saying that no one hears us. Why in the United States of America is our Native American families the only ones who are boots on the ground, who have set up their own grassroots programs to be able to find their missing and murdered Indigenous people. I'm going to turn it over to Annie. So she has a little bit more statistics, but she and I might be able to talk a little bit about how the work that we've done at the task force and how the recent legislative bills between Representative Mossberger, myself, and Senator Dingra are removing some of those barriers. And then the work of our friend, our sister, Abigail Lekanoff has revealed in the work that she's done in research. So Annie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so I think what's really important also to just reiterate what was just said is that this isn't an accident. This didn't happen. The violence that Indigenous people are experiencing across the United States wasn't an accident. It's the natural consequence of generations of colonization and generations of targeted federal state policy that harmed Indigenous people. And what we're experiencing now is the progression of that. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because Indigenous communities have the answers to how to fix this. They just need to have the platform and the tools to be able to implement those changes in ways that better their communities, that solve these issues, and that protect Indigenous people. And I'll add to the statistics. We currently have 135 missing Indigenous people in Washington State, as reported to the Washington State Patrol. And that number has been rising recently. And one of the reasons is not necessarily that we think more people are going missing, but we think that we are starting to develop relationships, and it's become easier for people to report their loved ones missing. And there's been some trust built with the Washington State Patrol, particularly in their tribal liaison positions, that allow for the reporting of missing Indigenous people to be a little bit easier.
Okay. Let's build on that and switch back to Representative Lekanoff in terms of the legislation that you championed. House Bill 1713, which is an act relating to improving law enforcement response to missing and murdered Native American women, that went into effect July 1st, 2022. Would you tell us a little bit about that legislation and why you started there?
I'm happy to. You know, just over this weekend, you know, I want to pause a little bit and just let us be mindful that just a few days ago, we had the alert system be triggered up in Ferndale, up in the homelands of Lummi Nation and Nooksack. You know, I'm so thankful that Angela was found. I'm so thankful for the alert system And I value the deep relationship that Lummi Nation Police Force has with the Washington State Patrol and with their local government. Lummi Nation was able to collaborate with the family and engage with the local police and trigger Washington State Patrol to have the alert system go out. And Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the first alert that went out. And within a day, we received news this morning, 6 o'clock this morning, that Angela was found. The missing Indigenous persons was added as a specific designation to the Endangered Missing Persons Alert System. And this is similar to the Amber Alert System. The alert system really was brought forth to me from an amazing group of broadcasters. Mark Allen was the president during the time. And as I sat down with the Attorney General's office, I asked, look, we have an opportunity to create an alert system. It's similar to the Amber Alert system, but it's very specifically modeled over the Silver Alert system. Many of you may not know the Silver Alert system is for our elders and our loved ones who have dementia. When we lose our beloved elders because they're in that critical mental health situation, an alert system goes out within that region to search for them. And this is what happened with the alert system when it came to Angela. When the broadcasters brought the concept and the idea to me, their hearts were full. The broadcasters felt that they could provide an opportunity to reach out, and I keep doing this, removing the hand of the mouth so we could hear the women crying out for help. And the broadcasters knew that they had a model set up through the alert system and through the Silver Alert system and a relationship with the Washington State Patrol that we could actually begin to resolve this crisis. I think back to just me as a mom. I think about the stories of our Native American families. Annie, when they tell us they're so alone, they don't know who to turn to when their daughters or their family members go missing. Where's the process? Do they call 911? Do they go to their local police? How does this process better work? And the alert system really provides a model and a process and a step-by-step for families to contact your local, call 911, call your local police, engage all the jurisdictions to collaborate and work together. Because you might remember, go back to what I put in the bike rack earlier. Tribes are sovereign nations, but tribes are sovereign nations within the reservation. This means when a Native American goes missing off the reservation, the jurisdiction goes within the state. The local tribal police cannot go out and start persecuting and engaging in a local search or in a local situation. That has to be triggered by the Washington State Patrol. The alert system, going back to the conversation, the opportunity that I see here is it's building that trust that me as a mom, if my daughter goes missing, I'm not so alone. I'm building a trust that my local government, my tribal government, and my state government jurisdictions will work together to find her. When my daughter, who's 18, and I talked about this bill, she knew I traveled across the United States alone a majority of the time. She's like, Mom, this means if something happens to you, if I'm home with Dad, I know that I have others looking for you. I have others that know that you're gone. I won't sit here by myself trying to find out where am I going to go to find my mom. And I felt the same way. Where would I go if my daughter goes missing? Now I know that there's a process set up that says within the area of where I was last seen, everyone will be looking out for me, whether it's a grocery worker, whether it's someone at Starbucks, whether it's a doctor, an attorney, everyone will see that I've gone missing and they'll go and they'll help find me. Okay. So I think that's what's really important, and we have to trust the process. Okay. So Annie, you talked a little bit about that earlier too.
I just want to do a gentle reminder to people, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box to put your questions in. Annie, one of the questions I have, so we now have, thanks to Representative Lekanoff and other supporters, a law that institutes basically an alert system specifically for Indigenous members. what role does the Attorney General's office have in both implementing this new law and to deal with this issue in general? And we know that it's a complex jurisdictional process, really, in terms of tribes, cities, counties, the state, and the federal, depending upon what crime is committed where by whom. Can you talk a little bit about how law enforcement gets deployed and where the AG is in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with just talking a little bit about expanding on what Representative Lekanoff had said about the jurisdiction. Jurisdictions are very complex. So you can, my background is in victim services. I've worked in victim services for a very long time. I remember having a case where they literally had tape measures out. The case had happened in a federal building. They had tape measures out measuring by the feet where the victim had been standing, where the perpetrator had been standing, where the incident took place, how they had moved around the building, trying to determine jurisdiction and who would have jurisdiction over that case. So that's how complicated things are. When we're in the state, when we're on, when you're in Whatcom County and you have a crime happen, you call Whatcom County Sheriff. They come and they take the report. They do their job. They're able to pretty straightforward figure out jurisdiction. For Indian country, it's much different. So it depends on whether the victim is a enrolled tribal member, who the offender is, what the type of crime is, what the individual agreements are in that jurisdiction. Are they cross-deputized? Do the tribal police have the powers of a sheriff? All kinds of things. We could talk about this for days and days and days. So it is really challenging, particularly for tribal police, to be able to exercise jurisdiction over crimes that happen even within the bounds of reservations. So there is it's very challenging on a federal level. The Attorney General's office, what we are really looking to do is to coordinate the conversation and to provide a place where we can come together to share ideas and push forward common sense fixes to this problem. We don't necessarily have any power to tell anybody who has jurisdiction or who doesn't have jurisdiction. That's not the way our office works. But we are able to provide a place to coordinate and this place to get the conversation started. Because what's also happening is that a lot of law enforcement speaking to each other. So county or city law enforcement may not know the jurisdictional complexities that tribal law enforcement faces and vice versa. And so we're really looking to build those relationships between law enforcement so that we start having those important conversations about what it means to police in these very diverse communities.
Jane, can I add a little bit to that?
Of course.
But Annie, another conversation that we're having that came from the work of Director Abigail Lekanoff with the Urban Indian Health Institute is making sure that one of the gaps we're following is we need to have not only does our police, our jurisdictions speak to each other and collaborate, right, Annie? But their databases have to be able to connect and speak to one another. So there's databases between the tribal, the local, the state, and the federal governments. And believe it or not, they're not all coordinated to where they can share information and share data as regularly as you would think we would have that. But part of the task force and part of the work that Abigail has pointed out, not only at the state level, but at the national level, is how do we create the technology in the databases so our information is gathered correctly, just like identification of a race by a coroner, but also data sharing between all the different governing bodies. We need to be able to move forward with having database systems that actually literally talk to one another. And being able to have that is going to take an investment from the state and a collaboration with us, working closely with Department of Interior, Deb Holland's work that she's doing on missing and murdered Indigenous people, because we need the funding, we need the technology, but we need the experts to be able to implement that.
Can we talk a little bit about the urban Indian population, those folks who are not strongly tied to or near tribal lands? Some of them are not native to Washington State. I understand that it's a different, it can be a different experience for them compared to women and people who are living on tribal land and therefore have tribal resources, specific tribal resources.
Do you want me to start with that one, Annie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So I myself, I am part of that population as an Alaska Native living not living on a reservation. Seattle and Spokane are one of the largest populated areas of Native Americans who are no longer living within their reservation or within their territory to receive those governmental services. However, we have I like to say we have a large family almost within our tribe ourselves, within Seattle and within Spokane. We engage with the Urban Indian Health Center, the American Indian Health Commission, the Seattle Indian Health Board, the Chief Seattle Club. This is our place where we gather, where we're able to gather resources, where we get much of the services that you would get at if you were a member of a reservation and you were living on a reservation. The services you get there are similar to the services that we get in our urban communities. Where you say it might be different, you're absolutely right, Jane. I would not call Swinomish tribe if my daughter went missing, or the Samish Nation, because I live in Anacortes. My relationship is going to be with the state government. It's going to be with Washington State Patrol directly. I won't have an advocate if I were a reservation tribal member. If a woman goes missing at Swinomish, the Swinomish tribal police and their family advocates would engage with my family to help me find my daughter if I were Swinomish, or if I were Samish, same with the Samish police. Me as a mom, my relationship is going to be with the urban Indian organizations and relying upon them and their family advocacy, their mental health, their behavioral health, their counseling to be able to wrap their arms around me and help me through this critical crisis and this situation. That's a little bit of how our communities help, and that's how they're shaped. But I tell you this, even though I would go to these organizations for help, I think knowing the family and the love that I have from our Native American communities, Swinomish, Samish, Lummi, Nooksack, Upper Skagit, the tribes, Tulalip, would wrap their arms around me. Annie would wrap her arms around me, just because we are that tribal, tight-knit family community where we will help each other and do what's needed. And Annie, you've heard conversations from the families within these urban organizations about how they get support. Maybe you could share on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that this, particularly in the Seattle area, there's a really, really tight-knit urban community where people from it's a very diverse, there's people from all types of Indigenous backgrounds that come there to find family and to find connection to culture, and to honor our Coast Salish ways as well, and to find connection to Coast Salish culture in those ways too. And it is really lovely to see. I think that particularly MMIWP families have really built a coalition, and that's the foundation of this movement that we're in to end violence against Indigenous women and Indigenous people, is this movement is this coalition of families who have just created something that we can't ignore. And it's really been a beautiful thing to see. And I'm grateful for that community to be there in times of need. And I think what's also important to acknowledge is that, as we've said throughout this program, the violence against Indigenous people does not recognize boundaries. So it happens on reservations, but it happens off reservations as well at sometimes the same type of rate as when we compare the two. So it's really important to acknowledge that as well, and that the community needs the services, and they need the buy-in from cities and counties to understand the crisis that's happening among Indigenous people in the urban settings, because the violence is continuing to happen there.
Okay, I want to switch to, for both of you, a question about media. Before we started, I mentioned that the Bellingham Herald, the Cascadia Daily News, and King 5 all reported on Angela McGuire's situation yesterday, that she was missing. And I think the Bellingham Herald did a piece on the new legislation establishing the alert system. Annie, let's start with you. You've studied the role of media in these cases. We can't legislate it, we can't make them cover it, but we've seen the power that they can have. So what would you like to see with the media, and what are your thoughts on keeping the media engaged on this topic?
Yeah, I think in recent years, I really have to commend the media for doing a much better job. They have kind of overall done a much better job of engaging with the stories, and not just covering the stories, but engaging in them in a way that humanizes the crisis and humanizes what is happening. As we said at the beginning of the program, I study the way that particularly homicide is covered in the media. And I can see a difference. I can see a difference over the last 10 years in how the media covers the homicide of Indigenous women, particularly. And they've done a much better job. But I think what is still really needing to happen is to make sure that the way that the story is told in the media is reflective of the experiences of the family and of the survivors that are here to tell their stories. They have that story to tell. And sometimes what we've heard from families is that the media doesn't always accurately reflect that experience. So I think that's one area that that use a little bit of work. But we are, I think, starting to see some positive change in media spaces when in regards to coverage.
Okay. And Representative Lekanoff, what are your thoughts on the role of the media, and is there any influence that elected officials can have, or that the general public can have, to encourage constructive media coverage? Because we've certainly seen media coverage that is not good, not helpful.
Well, I think that, thank you. And, the work that Annie's been doing and watching the media and watching it grow and adjust and change, and the work that Abigail has done, Patsy Whitefoot, many of my other colleagues that have worked with the media, teaching the media to respect, and to respect the families, respect the youth, to be able to portray the story actually to where it shares the crisis of the situation holistically. I think it's really important. But the media understands this also. And I've had a number of interviews, Annie and I both, and many of us, but the media has come out and said, we can do a better job. We need to be respectful of the family, respectful of the situation. We need to protect the youth and the identity and the crisis of what's happening. They too want to learn. They too want to be able to do a better job. They want to be able to gain the trust of our Native American communities, because we've been quite private. Native American people are not ones out there who would be the first ones to jump on a TV channel to tell the story. We hold that close to us. So the media wanting to be trained, wanting to be engaged, wanting to know how to work with our Native American communities, how to reach out to them, how to protect the identity or the crisis of the situation, I think is really important. I see many of our big local news reporters, stations from King to Como, etc., also exploring how do they support the work that we're doing here at the legislative level and what awareness we're bringing to MMIW. I mean, can you imagine, without letting the cat out of the bag, but could you imagine going to one of these news websites and there's actually a whole page on MMIWP, who's out there missing, what the updates are, stories that are being told, because one of the things that we're really working on is broadcasters and the alert system are making it aware to those who are violating us that this is done. We are not going to be quiet about this anymore. Everybody knows that Native American women and people are going missing and being murdered and ripped from their families. The more awareness we bring to it, the less we hope that this will happen to our people now and in the future. So broadcasters can help us do that.
Just and a reminder to our audience, MMIW is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People. So we use both acronyms. Let's talk a little bit about law enforcement before we go into next steps after where we are now. What would you like to see happen with law enforcement and the role? Because we have many different players in this. Any thoughts on that for either of you?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So I think that I think that I and the task force would like to see some additional coordination between the law enforcement agencies, and to start working on how information and how data can be collected and shared in a way that respects tribal sovereignty, respects the individuals that the data is being collected on, and provides us the information we need to understand and address the crisis. And also I think we want to see law enforcement be a little bit more trauma informed about their practices when working with families. We've heard from a number of times from family members that sometimes their reports are dismissed. Sometimes their reports are not taken seriously, and sometimes they have to try very, very hard to get a missing loved one reported missing, and that is very traumatizing for them, and erodes that trust we're working so hard to build. So I think we'd like to see some best practices. We'll be working on some best practices. I'm getting a little bit into next steps, but I won't go too far, I promise. But we'd like to see some best practices, some standardization, and some increased collaboration, particularly between the tribal and non-tribal agencies.
Okay.
Thank you, Annie, for kicking. I had to take a breath because there's so much that we can do better with our public safety. There's so much we can do better with communications, respect, treating our Native American situations and community members like real people, treating them with equality. There are times that, and I'll just say this, and I'll be just straightforward. Racism is thriving today. It still exists today as it did 200 years ago. Annie and I shared an experience over the 4th of July where a young Native American girl went missing in downtown Seattle. The family wanted the MMIW, it was July 5th, I believe, to be kicked in. The chief of police,
the alert system
to be kicked in. The chief of police did not do it. He didn't quite understand. His comments back were not respectful of Native Americans and Native American alert system of why this was important. It was dismissed. The alert system was dismissed. I won't share the racial comments that came out, or the feelings that came out from that police officer or chief of police out of that local jurisdiction. But that's what we're facing today. We need to remember that the Washington State Patrol, local police, cities and sheriffs, and our federal agencies, in my perspective, personal opinion, need to remember that this alert system and the work we're doing with Native Americans is really raising the awareness that our people have been victims for generations. That these alert system, the equality, the work that we're doing on diversity, building laws that bring our communities together, removes that racial time that we're facing now, and really addresses the respect that Native Americans need to be treated, not only within our state, but across this great nation. And it starts with how Washington State Patrol takes our cases seriously. We heard from families, the victims of families. Well, you know, what was the character of this girl? Are they on drugs? Are they running away? You know, is it something that's going on all the time? Well, we understand those are questions that may be asked, but at the end of the day, when the officers dismiss it, that's when we start facing challenges of where we need to dig a little deeper, and our victims and our family victims need to start working, and they start doing grassroots working. And that's what we're hoping to remove, is that our public safety will treat our cases and treat our people with respect, treat our families with respect. And the fact that our cases are being dismissed and not taken seriously as it would for if a white woman went missing, that's what I hope, in my personal intent of removing, and hoping that the public safety will rise above that racism and rise above how it was done in the past, and start working on these cases and take them more seriously. And maybe these statistics will start dropping in the future.
So let's pivot to next steps. Annie, what's going to happen next at with the task force at the AG's office?
Yeah, so we are really just getting started. Our first progress report comes out on Monday, so look out for that in the media, and that'll be available to the public. We have a number of recommendations. We have 10 recommendations that we have voted on to start addressing this crisis. We agreed as a task force, and we promised as a task force very early on that we would make changes when and where we could, that we wouldn't only wait for reports, we wouldn't only wait for the final report. The alert is a great example of that we would move forward on changes and move forward on closing the gaps whenever we could. We're committed to doing that. And so that's really what these recommendations represent, is we've listened to families, we've listened to communities, we've listened to law enforcement. We have spent a lot of time trying to understand the nature of the problem. And these are recommendations we feel can address what's going on right now. There are things people can implement, there are best practices that can start now to start closing some of those gaps. And we will continue to develop those recommendations. We have currently a list of over 100 suggestions that we've gathered from various venues about how to move forward in addressing the crisis. We're going to continue to research. We're going to continue to flesh those out. We're going to continue engaging with stakeholders, engaging with the media, engaging with law enforcement, engaging with community service programs to really understand what folks on the ground need to address this problem. And we're going to continue to make common sense reform that starts to close some of these gaps. And and then we will also be working on the data side of things as well, so collecting some data, understanding the challenges with the data a little bit more clearly, and starting to put those pieces together.
Okay. One quick question about the data, if I may. With what you've collected so far, is there anything that's really surprised you?
I think the rate of racial misclassification has really surprised me. We do have we found that Indigenous people, Native American people in Washington state are more likely to be identified as another race rather than Native American. And that makes it really, really hard to understand how violence affects Native American people when the data isn't being collected appropriately. And so I think that was really surprising to me to see how apparent that was when we started looking at some of the data that we currently have. And then and so that's one of the things we'll be looking to address, as well as understanding the racial misclassification.
Okay, all right. What about next steps legislatively? What would you like to see happen? Because this is clearly but it's a huge first step, but a first step, having the alert system.
I think we've got incredible recommendations coming out of the MMIW. So as Annie said, you'll see some legislative work coming from myself and my colleagues, being able to increase the capacity of the task force, support all governing bodies to be able to engage, collaborating with providing more funding and support to the Attorney General's office to be able to create more permanent positions and permanent offices and capacity to be able to address this long term. I want to make sure that if I'm not here next session, that the Attorney General's office will still have things in place to be able to manage the work that we've done. I think there's an incredible opportunity right now that we're doing at the state legislative level for cold cases. But I also want to take a look at what Secretary Holland is doing about creating cold case units across this nation. And I support the request from Yakima Nation, who asked that one of those cold case units be placed in Yakima Nation, as they have, I believe, Annie, over 36 missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples coming out of that reservation alone. So we have a lot of work to do. I look forward to collaborating and supporting Representative Mossbooker as she continues to work on MMIW cases. She comes out of the Yakima Nation area. She has carried a lot of the water on this, being a woman, being connected into the police world herself, but also working with Senator Dingra on what more that we could be doing. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration and a lot of support from the public, from all of you, Jane, all of you saying, and it gets emotional that Native American people matter, that you as a Native American woman, you matter. I grew up where my aunties and my moms and most of my friends, my Native American women say this, we got to sit down, and we were sat down at an early age and said, know your name, know how to spell your name, know your address, be able to write your address, be able to know your auntie's address. Because if you're ever taken, and you're more likely to be taken, Deborah, than you, Jane. You, Deborah, will be taken. You'll be murdered quicker than you, Jane, because of who you are and what you look like, and the fact that no one cares. That was the sit-down talk that many of us who look like me had. I had to have that talk with my daughter. I don't want my daughter to have that talk with her daughter. And more legislative work, more collaboration, more conversations like this is going to be really important for us.
Now, I just want to say, because I know this is a wrenching topic for you, and having you be so candid is incredibly helpful, because I do think public opinion matters on this. What gives you hope?
Voices like yours.
What gives you hope?
Voices like yours, Jane.
Okay.
Voices like the 49 people who are signed on today. Annie's leadership. Annie is a phenomenal young woman who's going to be stepping into my steps in the future. My daughter, at the age of 16, coming home from a National Indian Conference where women were educated, the young girls were educated on what MMIW was. Finding hope from the work that Abigail Alcohawk's doing when she says, hey, Deborah, we've got to work on preventative work. We've got to make sure that our Native American women and people in our community are educated, that are taught. We need to be able to address the incidents that are happening within our own community. We're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women. We think that only non-natives are taking our women and this is happening. But our own historical drama and violence that's happening within the reservation is also connected to us. Our Native American girls are being taken and being sold off in sex trafficking and drug trafficking. Just a couple of months ago, I was sitting down with some tribal women leaders, and we were in middle of the reservation, all windows, and Native Americans are walking by their community members, they're like, not only is missing and murdered Indigenous women's people an issue, but it's also connected to the drug trafficking and the sexual trafficking. Our Native girls are being taken out and being tied to beds and being used in sexual trafficking and drug trafficking. They're being drugged up, tied to beds until they can escape. And that is the truth of today, and that's happening today. And this is all part of the work that I find is so important, that if we don't address the historical trauma of what's happening within our Native communities, if we don't provide preventative work in behavioral health and in drug trafficking and in sexual abuse, if we don't address the own root of the problem, and sometimes it's within our own reservation, then this is going to continue to happen over and over again. And that takes investment at all governing levels. It takes removing jurisdiction barriers. It takes data assessment. It takes providing the reports like Annie was sharing with the public. And it takes voices like yours, Jane, calling up your representative at all levels of governing and saying, this is really important. We must not let this go forgotten. Don't make this just a news media of today. It has to be consistent, because it's a crisis.
Yeah. Before I turn it over to questions, yeah, you just raised a very good point. We're in election season, where we have an opportunity to ask people running for office questions. What should we be asking them on this issue?
I have amazing candidates who are running up in the 40th, the 42nd, the 39th, the 10th, that I'm really supporting. Ask your candidates, how aware are they of the situation? Are they aware of the MMIWP crisis? Where are they if they were to suggest legislative work? How would they call if they were running? Who would they speak to learn a little bit more about this matter? The answer shouldn't be, well, we have Deborah Lekanoff. She's the only Native American in the legislature. We'd go ask Deborah. For me, I hope the answer would be, I take this seriously as a priority as I serve in the state legislature, or I serve in Congress. Don't defer to the only brown person in the room, because every elected official at the local, state, and federal level has a obligation to this, because we all are part of their constituency.
Okay. All right. Oh, good, Annie, you're back. Let me ask.
Thank you. I apologize about that.
No, that's okay. We were just talking about what gives Deborah hope. So let me ask you the same question about looking forward. What gives you hope that this could improve this situation?
Yeah, I think this is a really timely question, because, you know, I like to be honest about how hard this work can be. This work is really, really difficult sometimes. And sometimes you don't feel a whole lot of hope. Sometimes it feels really, really desperate and really, really hard. And when the alert was issued earlier this week, it was a moment for me where I realized maybe we can do this. Maybe we can. It worked really well. It was a system in place where there had not been a system before. Normally, I would literally work with our public affairs unit to make sure that those kinds of alerts got out to the media, got out to law enforcement. I would do that. I would make the calls, and it would take several of us all day to be able to do what was accomplished in less than half an hour with the alert. And it felt like even though a loved one had gone missing, and that is what we want to prevent, and we never want to have to issue an alert ever, but someone did go missing, and the system actually worked. It worked how it was designed. And that filled me up, filled my air, like my lungs back up with air. It was it was for a long time, the first time in a long time where I really thought, okay, we can do this. And maybe the system isn't always perfect, but the system can work. And the commitment that this task force has to the issue and the commitment that all of our partners have to the issue gives me hope every day. And we're going to continue to really fight for this. We're going to continue to, this is important. This isn't just, you know, as Representative Lekanoff was saying, like, this isn't just the newest media story for us or what is a popular topic right now. These are our loved ones. These are our family members. These are our relatives. And we're going to continue to fight really hard until we end the violence against Indigenous people.
All right. Well, thank you both. It's a very, very hard topic. It's a very important topic, and really appreciate it, your time and your heartfelt answers here. I'm going to turn this over to Dan Rass, who has some questions from our audience. Dan, are you all set?
The first question follows on with the answers that you were both giving a few moments ago. The questioner asks, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, is this problem currently greater or lesser than it has been in the past? And are there specific modern causes for a large number of MMIWP, or is this simply a matter of better record keeping and more publicity? And either one of you can start.
Maybe I'll just, in my personal observation first, Dan, it's good to see you. Thank you, my friend.
Good to see you. Thank you.
For almost 20 years, and I've learned a lot of my work that I do in Indian campaign policy from the great Dan Rass. So thank you so much. I couldn't say, who's to say whether and Annie, correct me if I'm in your observation, what you're seeing, but who's to say that this was really a bigger crisis in the 1960s and the 1920s than it is in 2022, because we don't know how many women actually were going missing. I think the awareness that my colleagues and that Attorney General Ferguson is doing, and across the nation with, Deb Haaland sitting in the Department of Interior, raising the awareness, creating better data, collaborating and working through all jurisdictions, and having the families come out and say no more. We are important in the advocacy work that they're doing. I think it's raising the level of importance, but to say whether it was worse then than it is now, I couldn't even know how to answer that, Dan, because we just don't know how many people that look like Annie and I have either been gone missing or gone murdered or have been included in some type of abusive situation. That was my thought, Annie.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can really quantify. I don't think we can quantify it in terms of numbers. I think that there are more resources devoted to addressing the problem now than there has been in the past. I also think that we're having more conversation, we're building more awareness. And so in those ways, I think it's changed. Whether or not it's better or worse, I can't really speak to, but I think that how we're addressing it is changing, and we're just going to continue to drive forward that change.
Okay, the next question is, there's a follow-up I have, Annie, and it's for you. The Attorney General has a task force. You're heading that up. You have many colleagues, and you mentioned a bunch of subgroups or subcommittees that you have. What exactly are the things they're looking at? And what's the task force like? What I really wanted to do was tell me what's coming out next Monday, but I don't think that's going to happen.
So yes, keeping it very high level. I'll say, we can talk about what the task force is kind of tasked with doing, and that is to understand the nature of the crisis. So understand the systemic, the institutional, and the social influences that have created the crisis and how we can address those, to address the jurisdictional issues between law enforcement, tribal jurisdictions, urban indigenous communities, and also surrounding states in Canada. To also look at the data and data practices, data sharing, data retention, and then to look at prosecutorial trends, and finally to assess the availability and the appropriateness of community services. So we have a very wide-reaching directive.
Okay, and
One
yeah,
thing I
Deborah?
want to add, just to add to that, Dan, a little bit. The wide wingspan of participants, when you go to the Attorney General's website, we have the task force page up. One thing that impresses me the most about this, Dan, when you start looking at what's coming next, is looking at who's developing what's coming next. And the wingspan of participants ranges from the Washington State Patrol to the Tribal Public Safety and Police, federally recognized tribes, urban organizations, legislative officials, experts in this area. The number of voices that are creating pathways forward is just it's overwhelming. That we go back to hope. That gives me a little bit of hope, is the number of experts working on this and the number of jurisdictions working on it. We could always use another attorney on it, Dan. So if you want to come out of retirement a little bit, we'll bring you on to work with us.
Well, let me put that back on your plate. As a legislator, when the interim report comes out, and maybe another interim report or the final report, what will you do with it, and how hard will it be to pass legislation?
As a legislator, the recommendations that are coming out of that are all part of the bill, the upcoming legislative bills that Annie and I are working on presently that'll come out of the Attorney General's office. I go back to, remember when I was asked, Dan, where did this idea come from? How did it evolve? The first call I made was to Annie Forsman and to Asa Washins. Asa Washins is a Yakama Nation member who is the tribal liaison to the Attorney General's office. I said, Annie, can we make this a agency request bill? Can you and Asa, can we do that? Annie, I don't think it took more than 15 minutes of a call. Annie's like, let me get right back to you. Automatically, the Attorney General's office was like, absolutely, this is going to be an agency request ask, which means we have legislative bills that we do. When you have an agency request bill, it kicks it up as a priority. It also moves it through the process, and it also comes with money, which is always difficult in state legislatures asking for more money. But they value this in the Attorney General's office. That brings me to your second question: how hard is this type of legislation to get through the state legislature? I have absolutely high regards for my Republican and my Democratic parties, because they see MMIW and P as a crisis that doesn't recognize a party. They also see it as a crisis that doesn't recognize whether it's a Senate priority or a House priority. We make this our priority. The executive branch of the governor's office was 100% behind this. Whatever you need, Governor Inslee shared, we are going to support. Let's move this through, but no more are we going to not allow those voices not to be heard. So new legislation coming through is going to come with some big asks, but I have no doubt in my mind of my colleagues, as I said in the middle of the floor of the People's House, either side saying, can't imagine them saying, no, I don't think that's an issue, Deborah. No, I don't think that's a priority. I think they're going to say, yes, Dan. Let's move this through. Let's take care of the crisis. We can't allow this to go unseen and unheard any longer.
And that's what you're hearing from the Attorney General, right, Annie?
Yeah, the Attorney General our office is very supportive of this, and we're willing to put forth the time and the resources and the energy we need to address this crisis. And we're looking forward to the next session and looking forward to the legislation that's going to come out of it.
Okay, well, another question is, as those of us here know, but maybe not everyone, the Supreme Court recently decided a very important jurisdiction case, Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, in which the court ruled that as for criminal jurisdiction over crimes committed in Indian country by, in this particular case, non-Indians against a tribal member, the state of Oklahoma had jurisdiction over that crime, where if the rule before that had been that if it's in the Indian country, exclusive jurisdiction is with the federal government and the tribes. How is that going to affect matters within the MMIWP arena? Or how will it affect it in Washington in particular?
I'm going to turn to Annie because I think that would be better coming from the Attorney General's office, and then I'll give my opinion after Dan.
Yeah, so I'll say that we have been busy writing the report and have not really gotten to think through and analyze and give our opinion on how we think this is going to affect the MMIWP crisis. There's a lot to consider, and we want to be careful in how we consider that. So I kind of have a non-answer is that we're thinking about it. We are going to be careful in how we move forward, and that we just aren't. The Attorney General's office is not ready to make a comment on it yet.
You know, and I'm gonna I can never take off my state hat, but I do want to pause just as a Native American and just pause and honor the work of the National Congress of American Indians President Fawn Sharp. In understanding how this impacts our treaties and our tribes, when Oklahoma held that the federal government and the state have concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute crimes committed by not Indians against this Indian country, it's a hard strike against the tribal sovereignty and the jurisdiction to protect tribal citizens. The consequence of this, I believe also and support my Attorney General, that we need to unravel that. There are certainly some incredible attorney generals across this nation that'll be having this discussion, but I also turn to the Native American Rights Fund, and turn to the work that John Echohawk will be doing. And I just have to say, he's his last quote I heard that he said is unauthorized and unconsented intrusions on tribal sovereignty are anti-ethical to tribal sovereignty and to tribal treaty rights. This is going to be a big conversation that I think needs to be addressed. But I also want to take a look at, Dan, do you remember when it was only a few months ago when Congress loudly supported tribal sovereignty and tribal criminal justice with the passage of the Violence Against Women Act that reaffirmed the right of tribal nations to protect their own people and their communities, but make no mistake, the Supreme Court decision in the Oklahoma case is a huge blow to that. So we're seeing our federal government struggling between the different branches, but every time they struggle, takes a hit. The tribes take a hit on their tribal sovereignty. So it's very hard for me to be a brown state legislator, very much a Native American fighting for tribal sovereignty through my bloodlines, but also being a state representative and understanding how that impacts our jurisdiction at the state level. A lot more to come on that one.
Yes, I think so. One question came in: when will this program be available for other viewing? As Forrest stated in the beginning, City Club programs are taped. They are released shortly after the program because there's some technical work that has to be done. You can view it probably starting Monday, but maybe earlier, both on the Bellingham City Club website and on BTV10. We'll be broadcasting it, and it's also available on their website. So as the final question, well, let me see if I can get it up. The member asked, are there members of the task force or of Indigenous communities who can speak for or can speak to high schools, universities, government agencies, as well as police departments, DSHS, and the like? And who does she contact?
Yeah, absolutely. We are happy as time and capacity allows to educate about what we're doing and the crisis more broadly. So folks can reach out to me directly, and I can put them in contact with task force members and help coordinate those efforts.
Okay. We have just a few minutes left. Do you want to make a closing statement, so to speak?
Maybe I'll let Annie close and then I'll follow her.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just say thank you. I really appreciate being given the forum and the ability to educate about this. It's obviously something that I'm very passionate about, and I appreciate it's important that everybody knows what's going on, and being able to educate in forums like this is a really good step forward. And I hope that you all keep an eye out for the report coming out on the 1st. We're very proud of it. It's a very good first step, and it'll contain a lot of really great information.
And I want to take the time to thank Annie. Annie is my backbone. She's my friend, and she holds me up as I chair the MMIW task force. And Annie, thank you for you and your team, and Asa for the incredible work, and all of my task force members. You're my family, and I'm so thankful for how courageous you all are in standing up and doing, making a difference for the women who weren't heard, the women who are lost today, and making sure that we protect the women of the future and our Indigenous people. But I'm going to be a little personal, Dan, and reach out to the people who look like me and sound like me. Be brave, my Native American brothers and sisters. Be brave. Part of the bills that we're doing is removing the hand from the mouth. Be brave. Be brave in your community. Stop the historical trauma that's happening. To those who are fighting and struggling with your own challenges, know that we're all thinking of you. Our Native American communities, whether we are of the Washington tribes who are federally recognized, state recognized, whether we are the urban Native Americans like myself, who are spread out across this great state, know that we all care for one another, know that we are one community, know that we're here to help one another, and we're here to make sure that every one of our Native American voices matter, that I matter. And I say that so often and so much because when our Native American communities, the first Americans, the first Washingtonians, are treated as if we don't matter, then we're the ones who are being murdered. We're the ones being left behind. We're the ones who are tossed into a reservation and forgotten. But Washington State can do something quite different. And I think that's what the Attorney General, Senator Dingra, Representative Mossberger, myself, and so many other state and congressional legislative members is doing, is making a difference of making sure that our Native American voices' lives matter. Be brave. Continue to be brave, because you're going to make the next generation, my daughter's daughter, know that she matters, her life matters, and we matter in the country that's first ours before it was anyone else's. So just in closing, Dan, thank you to you all for hosting this event, and invite us back anytime. We're happy to provide updates on any of the work that we're doing.
Well, on behalf of Bellingham City Club, thank you both for coming and providing beginning the discussion of what the problem is, where we go from here, and what gives us all hope. So I think that'll conclude our program. And again, thank you all, and thanks the audience for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.